History does not whisper, it screams. But we are often too deafened by our own arrogance to hear it. There's a specific mathematical architecture to ruin. A pattern so precise, so unforgiving, that it has already claimed three of the greatest superpowers humanity has ever known in the last 5 centuries. It does not matter if the empire is built on the gold of the Americas, the steam engines of Britain, or the ideology of the Soviet Union. The mechanism of death remains exactly the same. And right now, in the year 2025, the United States of America isn't just walking toward this precipice. We are sprinting toward it. We are following the script line by line, decision by decision, mirroring the exact same sequence of errors that turned world rulers into historical footnotes. Think about this. In 1590, Spain was not just a country, it was the world. It held the keys to the global economy, controlling half the planet's supply of gold and silver. Its infantry was invincible. Its currency was the language of trade from Manila to Madrid. 80 years later, Spain was bankrupt, broken, and irrelevant. A second-rate power that would never rise again. In 1914, Great Britain commanded the largest empire in human history. The sun literally never set on its dominion. The pound sterling was the bedrock of global finance. 4 decades later, the empire had evaporated. The currency had collapsed. Britain was reduced to America's junior partner, a shadow of its former self. In 1991, the Soviet Union stood as a titan. Nuclear supremacy, orbital satellites, a sphere of influence that split the world in two. It ceased to exist in fewer than 900 days. It wasn't destroyed by an invasion. It wasn't leveled by nuclear fire. It died from the inside out. It died of economic suicide. 3 times. 3 superpowers. 3 absolute collapses. They all followed a 7-stage cycle. And here's the reality that should terrify you. The United States has already completed 5 of those 7 stages. We are not approaching the pattern. We are living deep inside its terminal phase. This is not a political opinion. This is historical arithmetic, and the math says we are next. But before we can understand where we are going, we must understand what the death of a superpower actually looks like. Forget what you learned in school. Empires rarely end with a bang. They end with a whimper. A long, agonizing exhalation of economic exhaustion. It never starts with a lost war. It starts when the empire extends beyond its ability to pay for itself. It begins with the illusion of invincibility. Military bases in 150 countries. Wars fought on multiple fronts. Promises made to citizens that the treasury cannot fund. Debts that mathematics proves can never be repaid. At first, the rod is invisible. The currency still buys goods. The aircraft carriers still project power. The politicians still speak with authority. But beneath the polished surface, the foundation is already liquefied. Resources are misallocated to protect the ego of the state rather than the prosperity of the people. The productive capacity, the factories, the farms, the innovation, begins to shrink. The best minds, sensing the stagnation, begin to flee. Then comes the acceleration. Allies begin to hedge their bets. Enemies start testing the red lines. Trade partners quietly seek alternatives to your currency. And suddenly the very advantages that made you a god among nations become the shackles that drag you down. Your currency, once hoarded by the world, comes flooding back home, igniting the fires of inflation. Your military, spread across the globe like a thin net, snaps under the tension. This is not theoretical. This is the autobiography of Spain, Britain, and the Soviet Union. They fell because they believed they were exceptions to the rule. They believed their power was a permanent condition of the universe. They overextended their reach, they debased their money, and they refused to look at the ledger until the repo man came for the throne. Let us rewind the clock. Let us look at the original blueprint of disaster. Stage 1, the Spanish Trap. 1500 to 1600. This is where the modern era of collapse was invented. Following Columbus's voyage in 1492, Spain didn't just become wealthy, it became drunk on liquidity. They conquered the Aztec and Inca empires, seizing control of the richest veins of silver and gold the world had ever seen. By 1550, Spanish galleons were hauling 200 tons of silver across the Atlantic every single year. By 1600, that number had doubled. Spain controlled the money supply of Europe. The Spanish real was the first true global reserve currency. If you were a merchant in China, a trader in India, or a banker in London, you wanted Spanish silver. And this dominance created a fatal psychological flaw. The belief that money is the same thing as wealth. King Philip II, who ruled from 1556 to 1598, possessed a fortune that makes modern billionaires look like paupers. But he fell into the first trap of the cycle, military overextension. Philip believed his mission was divine, and he spent his silver to prove it. Spain wasn't just fighting a war, it was fighting every war. They fought the Ottoman Empire in the Mediterranean. They fought the French on the continent. They fought the Protestant rebels in the Netherlands. They fought the English Navy in the Atlantic. They fought indigenous insurgencies in the Americas and the Philippines. By 1580, Spain had military commitments on 4 separate continents simultaneously. The cost was beyond comprehension. Half of the empire's total revenue was incinerated by the military budget. But even with all the silver in the Andes, it wasn't enough. This leads to stage 2, currency debasement. When taxes and stolen treasure couldn't cover the bills, the Spanish crown did what every failing empire eventually does. They cheated. They began to debase the currency. They introduced the vellon, a coin that looked like silver but was mixed with copper. First, it was a small impurity. Then it was 50% copper. Then 75%. Finally, by the early 1600s, the coins of the realm were essentially worthless base metal, masquerading as wealth. The government insisted the face value was unchanged. The market disagreed. Merchants demanded more coins for the same goods. Inflation didn't just rise, it exploded. The price of bread, of cloth, of survival skyrocketed. The government had printed its way into poverty. Stage 3, the debt spiral. Despite the gold, despite the taxes, despite the debasement, Spain was drowning. They borrowed feverishly from Italian and German bankers, pledging future silver shipments that hadn't even been mined yet. The result? In 1557, less than 20 years into Philip's glorious reign, the richest empire on earth declared bankruptcy. They defaulted, they restructured, and then they did it again. Bankruptcy in 1560, again in 1575, again in 1596. 4 national defaults in 40 years. Each time, the crown promised reform. Each time, they simply went back to the addiction of spending money they did not have, financing wars they could not win. But the true killer wasn't the debt. It was stage 4, the atrophy of production. This is the lesson modern economists often miss. Spain had all the money, and that is exactly why they collapsed. When you can buy anything, you forget how to make everything. Why plant wheat when you can import it? Why build ships when you can pay the Dutch to do it? Why innovate when you have a mountain of silver? The Spanish nobility viewed commerce and manual labor as beneath them. Manufacturing withered. Agriculture stagnated. Spain became a hollow conduit. The gold arrived in Cadiz and immediately flowed out to pay for French wine, Italian silk, and Dutch weaponry. Wealth flowed through Spain, but it did not stay in Spain. By 1600, the superpower produced almost nothing. They were entirely dependent on global supply chains they could no longer afford. And when the mines finally began to deplete, when the easy money stopped, the entire societal structure collapsed under its own weight. Crime exploded. Beggars filled the plazas of Madrid. The best minds, the scientists, the merchants, the creators, fled to the rising powers of France, England, and the Netherlands. Spain suffered a brain drain from which it never recovered. By 1650, they had lost the Netherlands. By 1700, the Spanish Empire was a zombie, massive on the map, but dead in reality. Today, Spain is a beautiful country. It has culture, great food, and tourism. But on the geopolitical stage, it is a ghost. That is what stage 7 looks like. And if you think that 300-year-old story sounds vaguely familiar, just wait until we look at the British. Let's jump forward 300 years, from the sun-drenched plazas of Madrid to the fog-choked streets of London. If Spain was the empire of gold, Great Britain was the empire of credit. By the early 1900s, the British Empire was not just a political entity, it was the operating system of the modern world. The Union Jack flew over 25% of the Earth's land surface. 400 million subjects, 1 in every 4 people on the planet, owed allegiance to the crown. London was the financial center of the universe. The pound sterling was good as gold, literally and figuratively. Every major trade contract, from Shanghai tea to Argentine beef, was denominated in pounds. And just like the Spanish 3 centuries earlier, the British suffered from the fatal arrogance of the incumbent. They looked at history and said, "We are different. We are not feudal conquerors, we are industrial titans. The sun will never set on us." But the math does not care about your industrial output. It only cares about your balance sheet. And Britain was already walking the path of the dead. Stage 1, military overextension. By the turn of the 20th century, Britain was suffering from imperial indigestion. They had military commitments in India, throughout Africa, the Middle East, China, the Pacific, and the Caribbean. They were policing 6 continents simultaneously. The Royal Navy had to be larger than the next 2 largest navies combined. The cost was astronomical. Then came 1914. The moment the music stopped, when World War I erupted, Britain faced the ultimate imperial dilemma: stay neutral and watch Europe burn, or jump into the fire to maintain supremacy. They chose to fight. It was a choice that won the war and killed the empire. The war cost Britain over $40 billion. In today's money, that is $1 trillion incineration of wealth. To finance this, London drained its centuries of accumulated savings. They shipped their gold reserves to a rising industrial power across the ocean, the United States, to pay for food, steel, and ammunition. By 1918, the tables had turned permanently. Britain, the world's banker, ended the war owing billions to America. The creditor became the debtor. They had won the war. They kept the map painted pink, but the financial spine of the empire had been snapped. This desperation led directly to Stage 2 currency debasement. This stage is often misunderstood in the British context because it wasn't about printing copper coins. It was about a failure of reality. Before the war, the pound was backed by gold. The war forced them to suspend that backing. By 1920, Britain's gold vaults were half empty. Logic dictated that the pound was worth less, but pride dictated otherwise. In 1925, in an act of supreme economic hubris, Winston Churchill, then Chancellor of the Exchequer, returned Britain to the gold standard at the pre-war rate. They tried to peg the currency to a reality that no longer existed. The result was catastrophic. The pound was overvalued, making British exports, coal, steel, textiles, too expensive for the world to buy. Factories closed. Unemployment surged. The domestic economy was strangled to save the prestige of the currency. It lasted 6 painful years. In 1931, the dam broke. Britain was forced to abandon the gold standard. The pound lost 25% of its value overnight. The global reserve currency had just defaulted on its promise. The safe haven was no longer safe. Stage 3, the debt spiral. Britain never recovered from the debts of the First World War before the Second began. World War II was the final blow. Another $120 billion in costs. More loans from the United States. By 1945, Britain owed the US and Canada over $30 billion, an amount larger than their entire GDP. The optics were victorious. Churchill waving the V sign, crowds cheering in Trafalgar Square. But the ledger told a tragedy. The United States used its leverage to dictate the terms of the peace, effectively dismantling the British Empire's preferential trade agreements. Britain was technically a victor, but financially they were a vassal. They couldn't afford to turn the lights on without an American loan. Then came stage 4, loss of empire. It happened slowly, then all at once. In 1947, the crown jewel fell. India, the source of British wealth for 2 centuries, declared independence. Once the domino tipped, gravity took over. Over the next 2 decades, the wind of change blew through Africa, the Middle East, and Southeast Asia. The pivotal moment, the moment the world knew the empire was dead, was the Suez Crisis of 1956. Britain tried to assert military control over the Suez Canal alongside France. The United States, holding Britain's debt, simply told them to stop. The US threatened to crash the pound if Britain didn't withdraw. Britain withdrew. It was a public humiliation. It was the admission that a former superpower could no longer act without permission from its new master. Stage 5, currency collapse. The decline of the pound sterling is a slow-motion car crash that lasted 40 years. In 1940, 1 pound bought $4.03. By 1950, it was devalued to $2.80. By 1967, $2.40. By the mid-1980s, it nearly hit parity with the dollar. In 1976, the unthinkable happened. The United Kingdom, the nation that invented modern finance, had to go hat in hand to the IMF for a bailout like a developing nation. Today, the pound is a regional currency. Important, yes, but dominant? No. Britain maintains the trappings of power, a permanent seat on the UN Security Council, a nuclear arsenal, the special relationship. But everyone knows the truth. It is a museum of former greatness. A cautionary tale of what happens when you fight to hold on to the past while mortgaging the future. Now let us look at the most recent ghost, the Soviet Union, 1945 to 1991. This example is vital because it shows that a different ideology does not save you from the same math. Emerging from the rubble of WWII, the USSR was the other titan. They possessed a nuclear triad, massive conventional forces, and total control over Eastern Europe. They genuinely believed that communism was the engine that would bury capitalism. For 45 years, they stared down the United States. They matched us tank for tank, missile for missile, spy for spy. But while the armor was thick, the body inside was starving. Stage 1, military overextension Soviet edition. The Soviet Union committed the classic error, but on steroids. They spent an estimated 15% to 20% of their entire GDP on the military. For context, the US spends about 3–5% today. They were trying to match American global reach with a fraction of America's economic engine. They were fighting in Afghanistan. They were propping up regimes in Cuba, Vietnam, Angola, Ethiopia, and North Korea. Everywhere the US placed a chess piece, the Soviets felt compelled to place one too. They built a military machine that their economy had no business supporting. They prioritized guns over butter, missiles over meat. Stage 2, economic stagnation. By the 1970s, the Soviet growth engine had seized. Central planning, which had successfully industrialized the country in the 30s, could not manage a complex modern economy. Innovation died because there was no incentive to improve. Why build a better tractor if the quota says you only need to build more tractors? Factories produced goods nobody wanted. Agriculture was a disaster. The USSR, possessing the rich black soil of Ukraine, became the world's largest importer of grain. Think about that. A superpower that could not feed itself. They were kept alive only by high oil prices in the 70s. They were a gas station masquerading as a country. And when the oil price crashed in the 80s, the illusion crashed with it. The Soviet military machine was formidable, but the blood pumping through its veins was toxic. This brings us to stage 3, currency collapse. The Soviet ruble was one of the greatest fictions of the 20th century. It was not a currency, it was a theater prop. Internationally, it was worthless. You couldn't exchange it in London or New York. Even inside the Soviet Union, the citizens knew it was a lie. If you wanted to get things done, real things, you used vodka, favors, or illegal US dollars. The Kremlin couldn't buy foreign technology or grain with rubles. They had to pay in hard currency, gold and oil earnings. So when the price of oil collapsed in the mid-1980s, the Soviet Union didn't just lose revenue, they lost their ability to interact with the world. Their gold reserves drained away. They were a superpower running on empty, frantically writing checks that reality would not cash. Stage 4, loss of empire. Then came the year that changed everything, 1989. The periphery always cracks before the core. The Soviet strategic depth, the buffer zone of Eastern Europe, evaporated in a matter of months. Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Romania, East Germany. The dominoes didn't just fall, they accelerated. The Berlin Wall came down not because of a NATO tank charge, but because the Soviet Union was too broke to stop it. They couldn't afford the fuel to send the tanks. They couldn't afford the political capital to shoot the protesters. The empire shrank back to its borders, shivering and naked. Stage 5, complete collapse. On December 26, 1991, the hammer and sickle flag was lowered over the Kremlin for the final time. It took fewer than 900 days from the first cracks in the Berlin Wall to the total dissolution of the state. Think about the speed of that. A nation with 30,000 nuclear weapons, a seat at the UN, and a space program simply ceased to exist. There was no climactic battle, no foreign invasion, just a sudden, brutal economic heart attack. The military wasn't paid. The police stopped working. The supply chain snapped. The math finally caught up. 3 empires: Spain, Britain, the USSR, Catholic, Protestant, atheist, monarchist, democratic, communist. It didn't matter. The pattern destroyed them all with the same impartial cruelty: overextension, debasement, debt, loss of production, social decay, collapse. And this brings us to the present moment, to the part of the story that should keep you awake at night. The United States of America is not immune. We are not special. We are simply the latest tenant in the house of power. And if you overlay the American timeline onto the Spanish, British, and Soviet graphs, the result is terrifying. We have already completed 5 of the 7 stages. We are not at risk of decline. We are deep in the process. Let me prove it to you. Stage by stage, visual suggestion, a global map with bright red dots popping up everywhere, U.S. military bases. Aircraft carriers moving across oceans like game pieces. The counter for U.S. debt rolling up furiously in the corner. Narrator. Stage 1, military overextension. Just like Philip II of Spain and the British Empire, America has fallen into the trap of being the world's policeman. We currently maintain over 750 military bases in 80 different countries. We have active troops on the ground in over 150 nations. We have committed ourselves to defending a perimeter that spans the entire globe. We are sworn to defend the NATO alliance in Europe. We are sworn to defend Japan and South Korea. We have treaty obligations to the Philippines. We are entangled in the Middle East. We are actively countering China in the Pacific and Russia in the Arctic. Our annual military budget is $850 billion. That is more than the next 10 countries combined, most of whom are our allies. And yet, ask any general, and they will tell you the truth. It's not enough. We are stretched too thin. Our naval fleet is shrinking while China's is growing. Our recruitment numbers are at historic lows. Our equipment is aging. We are in the classic imperial dilemma. If China moves on Taiwan, Russia pushes further into Europe, and Iran closes the Strait of Hormuz simultaneously, we cannot stop all of them. We have the commitments of a god, but the resources of a mortal, just like Spain in 1580, just like Britain in 1914, just like the Soviets in 1980. The check mark is on the wall. Stage 1 is complete. Stage 2, currency debasement. The moment the wound was inflicted is precise. August 15, 1971. When President Nixon temporarily suspended the convertibility of the dollar into gold, he severed the anchor to reality. The dollar became a fiat currency, backed by nothing but faith and government promises. For a while, it worked. But since the year 2000, the discipline has vanished entirely. The U.S. money supply has increased by 400% in just 2 decades. Since 2020 alone, we have printed over $6 trillion. Creating nearly 1/5 of all dollars in existence in a span of months. We aren't shaving silver off coins like the Spanish or suspending gold redemption like the British. We are doing something far more efficient and far more dangerous. We are printing digital infinity. The result is mathematical certainty. Since 1971, the US dollar has lost 98% of its purchasing power relative to gold. That isn't an economic adjustment. That is theft. Every time the Federal Reserve prints $1 trillion to bail out a bank or fund a war, they are stealing value from the dollars in your savings account. The mechanism is modern, but the result is medieval. We have debased the currency to keep the illusion of prosperity alive. Stage 2, complete. Stage 3, the debt spiral. This is the point of no return. The United States national debt stands at $36 trillion. That is roughly 120% of our GDP. But the raw number isn't the scary part. The scary part is the interest. Because interest rates are no longer at zero, the cost to service that debt has exploded. We are now approaching $1 trillion a year just in interest payments. We spend more on interest than we do on the entire defense budget. We spend more on interest than on Medicare. And here's the definition of a death spiral. We are borrowing money to pay the interest on the money we already borrowed. It is a Ponzi scheme sanctioned by the state. In 2024, in a growing economy, not a recession, a growing economy, the U.S. government ran a deficit of $8 trillion. Spain defaulted 4 times. Britain borrowed until it lost its sovereignty. The USSR ran out of credit. We are walking the exact same path, claiming that because we are America, the laws of gravity don't apply. But debt is patient, and debt always gets paid, either by the borrower through austerity or by the lender through default and inflation. We have chosen inflation. Stage 3 complete. But money is just paper. The real rot lies deeper. It lies in the fact that we have forgotten how to do anything. Stage 4, loss of productive capacity. This is the silent killer. The one Wall Street ignores because the stock market keeps going up. But the stock market is not the economy. And the economy is not the nation. Just as Spain became a conduit for gold rather than a creator of value, the United States has transformed into a hollow empire. We design, we finance, and we consume, but we have forgotten how to produce. Over the last 40 years, we have gutted our industrial base, We shipped our factories to China, our assembly lines to Mexico, our textiles to Vietnam. We traded our independence for cheap consumer goods. We run a trade deficit of over $800 billion annually. That means every single year, nearly $1 trillion of wealth leaves our shores to pay for things we used to make ourselves. We are now dangerously dependent on foreign supply chains for our survival. 90% of our antibiotics come from China. High-end computer chips come from Taiwan. Even the steel and rare earth minerals required to build our fighter jets are sourced from potential adversaries. Spain collapsed because when the silver stopped flowing, they realized they had no farms. America is facing a similar reckoning. If the shipping containers stop arriving at Long Beach, the shelves go empty in 3 days. We have replaced engineers with financial engineers. We have replaced factories with apps. We have replaced resilience with efficiency. And in a crisis, efficiency is death. Stage 4, complete. Stage 5, social decay. When the economy hollows out, the society fractures. It is an inevitable chemical reaction. When a nation loses its purpose, when it stops building and starts merely consuming, it turns on itself. Look around you. Trust in institutions, Congress, the media, the church, the banks is at an all-time low. We do not trust our leaders, and worse, we no longer trust our neighbors. We are seeing the classic symptoms of an empire in terminal decline. Exploding wealth inequality, a mental health crisis that feels spiritual in nature, drug overdoses killing 100,000 Americans a year, a casualty rate higher than the Vietnam War, happening every single year in silence. Homeless encampments spreading like tumors in our major cities. And just like the Spanish intellectuals fled to France in the 1600s, we are seeing the big sort. The best and brightest are checking out, either moving to safe havens or simply withdrawing from the system, engaging in quiet quitting, refusing to have children, refusing to participate in a future they do not believe in. Fertility rates have collapsed below replacement levels. A society that stops having children is a society that has subconsciously given up on its future. Political dysfunction is total. We cannot agree on a budget. We cannot agree on a border. We cannot agree on the definition of basic reality. We are two different nations trapped within the same borders, screaming at each other while the ship takes on water. Everyone pretends it is fine. It's just a cycle, they say. It is not fine. It is stage 5. And history tells us that stage 5 is the last exit before the cliff. We are deep inside the sequence. The Soviet Union made it to stage 5 before it imploded. Britain reached stage 5 and slowly withered away. Spain lingered in the twilight of stage 5 for decades. But the timeline is accelerating, because now we are staring down the barrel of stage 6, loss of reserve currency status. This is the tipping point, the event horizon. For 80 years, the United States has enjoyed the exorbitant privilege. Because the world needs dollars to trade oil and buy debt, there is a constant global demand for our currency. This allows us to print money without immediate hyperinflation. It allows us to run deficits that would bankrupt any other nation. It allows us to weaponize our banks against our enemies. But you cannot weaponize a system forever without pushing your victims to build a new one. We are seeing the cracks form right now. The BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, are actively building an alternative financial architecture. Central banks around the world are buying gold at the fastest pace in 55 years, dumping dollars to hold hard assets. Saudi Arabia is discussing accepting yuan for oil. Russia and China are trading in their own currencies, bypassing the SWIFT system entirely. The world is tired of funding our debt. The world is tired of our sanctions. They are hedging their bets. When stage 6 hits, when the dollar is no longer the undisputed king, the game ends. All those trillions of dollars held abroad, they will come flooding back home. The inflation we saw in the last few years will look like a mild breeze compared to the hurricane that follows. Interest rates will skyrocket. The government will be forced to choose between defaulting on the debt or printing so much money that the dollar becomes confetti. And that leads to stage 7 collapse. Human beings struggle to understand exponential change. We think linearly. We think that if things are bad today, they will be slightly worse tomorrow. But systems don't fail linearly. They fail suddenly. Ernest Hemingway wrote about bankruptcy. 2 ways. Gradually, then suddenly. Empires are the same. The Soviet Union went from a superpower to a memory in 900 days. When the confidence evaporates, it doesn't take decades. It takes months. A currency crisis triggers a debt crisis. A debt crisis triggers a political crisis. The political crisis triggers social unrest. And overnight, the superpower becomes a cautionary tale. The military can't be funded. The pension checks don't clear. The power projection stops. The empire retreats, leaving a vacuum that others will rush to fill. Spain believed they were chosen by God. Britain believed they were the apex of civilization. The Soviets believed they were the inevitable future. They were all wrong. And now we are telling ourselves the same lie. It can't happen here. But the pattern does not care about American exceptionalism. The pattern is a gravity well. You cannot spend more than you earn forever. You cannot print wealth. You cannot consume what you do not produce. The laws of economics are as absolute as the laws of physics. We have broken every single one of them, and the bill is coming due. The scariest thing about the pattern is not the inevitable outcome. It is the acceleration. In the final stages, time compresses. Decades of folly are paid for in weeks of consequence. Since the year 2020, the United States has not just walked down this path, we have sprinted. We have printed more money in 5 years than in the previous 2 centuries combined. We have added more debt in a single presidential term than we did to fight World War II. We have weaponized the dollar to the point of breaking global trust. We have fractured our society to the point of paralysis. We are no longer approaching the danger zone. We are the danger zone. Stage 6, the loss of reserve currency status, is the final retaining wall. Once it breaches, the floodwaters of Stage 7 do not rise slowly. They arrive as a tsunami. Visual suggestion, a split screen. On one side, a politician speaking about strong fundamentals. On the other side, a calculator showing error. The camera slowly pushes in on the calculator. Narrator. Maybe you are thinking, but we are different. We have Silicon Valley. We have AI. We have the strongest military in history. That is exactly what they all said. Spain had the best navigators. Britain had the Industrial Revolution. The Soviets had the best rockets. Technology changes. Geography changes. But human nature does not change. And the laws of mathematics are immune to hubris. You cannot use AI to fix a debt spiral. You cannot bomb your way out of currency debasement. The pattern does not care about your exceptionalism. It only cares about your solvency. We are telling ourselves the same comforting lies that every dying empire whispers in the dark. We are too big to fail. The world needs us. It will stabilize. But history is a graveyard of nations that were too big to fail right up until the moment they fell. So what happens next? If we follow the trajectory of Spain, we become a regional power. Charming, irrelevant, a tourist destination for the new masters of the world. If we follow the British, we become a museum of our past glory, managing a slow, genteel decline while living in smaller houses and driving smaller cars. If we follow the Soviets, we face a sudden, brutal shattering, a breakup of the Union, a descent into chaos where the map itself is redrawn. The timeline is not set in stone, but the destination is getting clearer by the day. Maybe we have 10 years, maybe 5, maybe less. But when the collapse comes, remember this. It won't look like a movie. The sky won't turn red. The world won't end. Your world will end. The dollar in your pocket will cease to be a store of value. The promise of a pension will become a lie. The security you took for granted will become a luxury you cannot afford. The superpower becomes a normal nation. And for a people addicted to greatness, normalcy is a fate worse than death. We are standing on the tracks and the train is coming. We can hear the whistle. We can feel the vibration in the rails. Most people are closing their eyes, hoping that if they ignore it, it will go away. They are wrong, but you don't have to be one of them. If this analysis has opened your eyes, if you can see the overlay of 1590, 1914, and 1991 upon the world of today, then you have an advantage. You understand the sequence. When the news anchors are panicked, you will know why. When the politicians propose emergency measures that only accelerate the debt, you will recognize the desperation. When the currency fails, you will not be the one holding the bag. The answers to our future are not hiding in the predictions of pundits. They are written in the ink of the past. History has watched empires die the same way over and over again for 5,000 years. It is trying to teach us the lesson. The only question remaining is, are we brave enough to learn it before the final stage begins? We are moving into uncharted territory for America, but well-charted territory for history. Subscribe, because when we hit stage 6 and 7, you are going to want to understand what is happening, why it's happening, and how to survive it. I'll see you in the next one, assuming the dollar still buys anything by then.